Dawn always came quietly to San Isidro. The dust had not yet risen, horses snorted softly at the hitching posts. And the lamps inside the Last Chance saloon were being extinguished after a long night of cards and whiskey. At that hour, the town almost looked peaceful, as if it could forget that it stood on the edge of the law. The body was found by the watering trough. A half-asleep stable boy lowered a bucket into the water and screamed so loudly the sound echoed off the adobe walls. The man lay face down, one arm sunk in mud, the other stretched into dry grass. His hat had been placed neatly beside him, as if someone had shown a final, deliberate courtesy. His throat was cut cleanly. No signs of struggle. No signs of haste. Sheriff Blake crouched beside the corpse and stayed silent for a long time. He had seen enough death in his years: drunken knife fights, card game shootouts, bodies left behind after raids. But this was different. The killer had not robbed the man, the wallet was still there. This was no crime of rage, the cut was too precise. And most disturbing of all, a mark had been carved into the victim's chest after death, a shallow incision in the shape of a cross. "This isn't the work of a bandit," the sheriff finally said. "And it's not someone local." The dead man was Josiah Crawford, a land and cattle trader. Polite, smiling. Welcome in any home. A man with no enemies, at least, none that anyone knew about. By noon, rumors spread faster than the heat. In the saloon they whispered about the devil, about curses, about a stranger riding in from the desert. Some claimed they had seen a lone rider before dawn, heading west without stopping. Others swore no tracks led away from the watering trough at all. Sheriff Blake ordered the body covered and posted 2 deputies on night patrol, an unusual move for a town like San Isidro. Doors were locked earlier than usual. Mothers pulled children inside. The saloon stayed open, but laughter sounded forced, brittle. What no one in San Isidro understood yet was that this murder was not an ending. It was a beginning. His name was Caleb Mercer, and San Isidro was never meant to be more than a stopping point. He arrived the morning after the murder, riding a dark bay horse with a scarred flank and tired eyes that missed nothing. Caleb looked like many men of the frontier, dust on his coat, a rifle wrapped in oilcloth, a revolver worn smooth by years of use, but there was something in the way he sat his saddle that marked him as different. Not tense. Not careless. Calculated. He tied his horse outside the general store and stood for a moment, listening. The town spoke in whispers now. Fear changed the sound of a place. And Caleb had learned to hear it long ago. Inside the store, 2 men fell silent when he entered. Passing through, Caleb said calmly, setting coins on the counter. "Need water, feed, and a room for the night." The shopkeeper studied him longer than politeness required. "You picked a bad time." Caleb's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "So I've been told all my life." He took a room above the saloon. From his window he could see the watering trough where Josiah Crawford had died. The blood was gone, scrubbed away, but the ground still looked darker there, as if it remembered. Caleb remembered things too. Years earlier, he had worn a different coat and carried orders instead of bounties. The war had given him structure and taken everything else. When it ended, the killing didn't stop, it just lost its name. He drifted west, first as a hired gun, then as a bounty hunter, learning how easily the law bent when the land was wide and empty. People assumed he hunted men for money. They were wrong. Caleb hunted patterns, faces, names that resurfaced after years of silence. Men who had stood behind desks or pulpits or deeds to land while others bled. San Isidro was not random. Neither was Josiah Crawford. That night, Caleb sat alone in the saloon, nursing a whiskey he didn't need. He listened to the talk about the murder, about the mark on the body, about how Crawford had once bought land cheap from families who vanished soon after. Interesting, Caleb thought. Very interesting. Upstairs, in his room, he unwrapped a small bundle from his saddlebag. Inside lay a folded map, yellowed with age, and a list of names written in careful ink. Some were crossed out. One was not. Josiah Crawford. Caleb folded the paper again, slower this time, and returned it to the bag. Outside, the wind picked up, dragging dust through the streets like a warning. Tomorrow, San Isidro would wake thinking the danger had arrived yesterday. They had no idea how long it had been coming. Caleb Mercer had killed before. Men liked to pretend that mattered. What made Josiah Crawford different was not the blood, it was the decision. 3 nights before the body was found, Caleb had been watching the watering trough from the shadows behind the freight depot. He chose that place because Crawford always stopped there before heading home, always alone, always unarmed. A habit. Habits were the truest confessions men ever made. Caleb did not rush. He had followed Crawford for 2 days. Watched him smile at shopkeepers, tip his hat to women, joke with the sheriff as if nothing in his life had ever been taken by force. At night, Caleb slept outside town, counting stars and remembering names that no longer had graves. Crawford's name had been written years ago, in a hand that shook with fever and rage. He signed the papers. He said the law was on his side. When Crawford reached the trough, Caleb stepped out quietly, boots sinking into the damp earth. He did not speak. He did not need to. The sound that escaped Crawford's throat when he turned was not a scream, it was recognition. "Wait," Crawford whispered. "I don't," Caleb cut him off with a single, precise motion. He had learned where to place the blade so the body would fall without noise. Crawford dropped to his knees, then forward, breath leaving him in a wet, final rush. Caleb knelt beside him until the movement stopped. Only then did he do what he had come for. He placed Crawford's hat beside the body, straightened his coat, and carved the mark into his chest, not out of anger, but as a signature. A reminder. Not for the town. For himself. The cross was not religious. It never had been. It marked intersections, places where lives had split and never found their way back. By the time Caleb rode out of San Isidro before dawn, the killing was already finished inside him. No thrill. No relief. Only confirmation. He returned the knife to his boot and checked the list again at his camp. 1 line crossed out. Ink dark and final. But as the fire crackled low, Caleb realized something he had not planned for. He felt watched. Not by the dead. By the living. Somewhere in San Isidro, someone was already asking the wrong questions. And sooner or later, the law would stop chasing shadows and start following tracks. Caleb stared into the flames, knowing one truth with absolute clarity: the first kill was never the hardest. It was the one that taught you how many would follow. The second body was found 2 towns west, in a place called Dry Creek, where the land cracked like old bone and the wind never stopped moving. This one hung from the frame of an unfinished barn. Ezekiel Moore, former circuit judge, later a preacher when the bench no longer protected him. His boots hovered inches above the dirt, toes pointed down as if he were still trying to touch the ground. His neck was broken. But that wasn't what unsettled the men who cut him down. Pinned to his coat was a folded land deed, yellowed and brittle, signed more than 15 years earlier. And carved into his chest, beneath the torn shirt, was the same mark. A cross. By the time the news reached San Isidro, Sheriff Blake felt the certainty settle in his gut like cold lead. 2 towns. 2 respected men. 2 killings that made no sense if you believed in coincidence. Federal Marshal Thomas Hale arrived the following afternoon, dust-stained and sharp-eyed. He listened without interrupting, asked for names, dates, papers. He did not smile once. These men knew each other, Hale said eventually. Or they were part of the same thing. The third killing confirmed it. It happened fast, too fast for comfort. In Red Hollow, a rail stop barely worthy of a name, a land surveyor named Manuel Rios was found dead beside the tracks. No gunshot. No struggle. His throat cut clean. His hands folded over his chest like a corpse prepared for burial. Tucked into his vest pocket was a map marked with boundary lines, and one corner torn away. The cross was there again. 3 towns. 3 professions. 1 pattern. Hale spread the documents across a table in the San Isidro jail: deeds, surveys, court rulings. When aligned, the papers told a story no one wanted to hear. Entire families displaced. Land transferred legally and violently at the same time. Names repeated in ink while others vanished completely. This isn't random, Hale said quietly. This is a reckoning. Witnesses began to remember a writer. Always alone. Always quiet. A man who asked polite questions and never stayed long. No one could give a clear description, only that his eyes looked past people. As if measuring something they couldn't see. Caleb Mercer rode under 3 different skies that week, never sleeping twice in the same place. Each night, he crossed another name from the list. Each morning, another town woke to blood and disbelief. But patterns cut both ways. With every body, the distance between Caleb and the law shrank. The trail behind him was no longer invisible, it was written in paper, flesh, and fear. And for the first time since he began, Caleb understood something he had tried to ignore: he was no longer hunting alone. He was being hunted back. Fear does not arrive all at once. On the frontier, it seeps in slowly, through half-closed doors, through glances held a second too long. Through the sudden quiet when a stranger enters a room. By the end of the week, fear owned the land. In San Isidro, the saloon still opened every evening. But the piano played softer, and no one laughed without looking over a shoulder first. Men sat with their backs to walls. Women pulled curtains shut before sunset. Horses were brought in early, rifles kept closer than prayer books. Sheriff Blake doubled the night patrols. It didn't help. Every sound after dark became suspicious: the creak of a sign, the cough of a drunk, the wind dragging itself down the street like something alive. Mothers stopped letting children run between houses. The school closed until further notice, though everyone knew what that meant. Federal Marshal Hale rode constantly. Town to town, speaking to clerks, widows, old men who remembered things they had once been paid to forget. He learned that Crawford, Moore, and Rios had all signed papers on the same stretch of land cleared during the war, when records burned and men disappeared. They buried it legally, Hale muttered one night. Studying the maps. But not clean. Rumors grew faster than facts. Some said the killer was a preacher possessed by scripture. Others claimed it was a gang, moving faster than any posse could follow. A few swore it was the ghost of the war itself, come back to settle accounts. Only Hale saw what mattered most. The killings were moving east. Not randomly. Deliberately. Like someone following a path laid down long ago. Caleb Mercer felt the change too. He sensed it in the way doors closed quicker, in the way questions were no longer curious but sharp. He stopped riding into towns by daylight, choosing the edges instead. Camps were smaller now. Fires lower. Still, he did not stop. Another name came off the list near Stonewall Crossing, a former militia captain who now owned a prosperous ranch. The killing was quick. Quiet. Clean. The cross carved without hesitation. But this time, Caleb made a mistake. A boy saw him right away. Not his face. Not clearly. But the hoarse, dark bay, scarred flank. By morning, the description reached Hale. For the first time since the first body, the marshal smiled. "Good," he said softly. "Now we're getting somewhere." Above the plains, the sky stretched endlessly blue and uncaring. Beneath it, men locked their doors and loaded their guns, knowing something had broken that would not easily be fixed. The reckoning was no longer a whisper. It was loud enough now for everyone to hear. The arrest came too quickly. In Dry Creek, less than a day after Marshal Hale circulated the description of the scarred bay horse, a drifter named Evan Pike was dragged out of a boarding house and put in irons. He owned a similar mount. He carried a knife. He had no friends willing to speak for him. That was enough. The townspeople wanted an ending more than they wanted the truth. They filled the street outside the jail, shouting demands the deputies pretended not to hear. Someone threw a bottle. Someone else shouted the names of the dead like a prayer twisted into a curse. Pike swore his innocence until his voice broke. No one listened. Marshal Hale arrived too late to stop the arrest, but not too late to doubt it. Pike didn't fit the pattern. His knife was dull. His hands shook when questioned. And he knew nothing of deeds, surveys, or the names Hale carefully slipped into conversation. "This man is scared," Hale told the sheriff. "Not driven." The sheriff hesitated. The crowd did not. Before Hale could act, news arrived from White Mesa. Another body. This one lay in a church. Samuel Crowley, former territorial clerk, was found kneeling at the altar, head bowed as if in prayer. His throat was cut from behind. Beneath his coat, carved into his chest, was the cross. Pinned to the Bible was a folded document, a registry entry, signed and sealed, transferring land from 3 families to the territorial office due to abandonment. The date matched the others. Panic turned into fury. The mob in Dry Creek fell silent as the news spread. Eyes shifted toward the jail. Toward Evan Pike. The lie everyone had clung to collapsed in seconds. Hale ordered Pike released under guard, but the damage was done. Trust in the law had thinned to nothing. Caleb Mercer heard about the mistake 2 nights later. Camped near a dry arroyo. He listened from the dark as riders talked too loudly, relief and anger mixing in their voices. They were close now. Closer than he had planned. For the first time since the killings began, Caleb did not cross a name from the list that night. He stared at it instead. Only 2 remained. He had always known the law would stumble. He hadn't expected it to stumble toward him so fast. Far away, Marshal Hale studied the map again. This time with new certainty. The path no longer pointed to a place. It pointed to a man. And the space between hunter and hunted was closing from both sides. The breakthrough came not from the living, but from the forgotten. Marshal Hale found it in a records room that smelled of dust and mold, tucked beneath the courthouse in Stonewall. Most men avoided the place, old papers meant old sins, but Hale stayed until his eyes burned and his fingers blackened with ink. He began laying the documents side by side. Deeds. Surveys. Court rulings. Militia reports. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a map, not of land, but of theft carefully disguised as law. Entire settlements erased by signatures. Families driven out, then declared abandoned. The same small circle of names appeared again and again, rotating roles: clerk, judge, surveyor, preacher, captain. And one more thing connected them. Each document had been countersigned by the same witness. Caleb Mercer. Not as an executioner. As a soldier. Hale felt the weight settle in his chest. Mercer had been there when the land was cleared. He had escorted families out. Stood guard while papers were signed. followed orders that no longer existed on any official record. The cross suddenly made sense. It wasn't a symbol of faith. It marked crossings, legal lines where lives had been cut in half. Meanwhile, Caleb was unraveling. He had buried the evidence carefully over the years, burned papers, discarded badges, new names in new towns. But the items he kept were never meant to be hidden forever. At his latest camp, deputies found the fire pit still warm. Nearby, buried beneath loose stone, they uncovered a saddlebag. Inside were folded clothes belonging to the dead. A preacher's collar. A surveyor's gloves. A rancher's pocket watch. Still ticking. And at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, the list. 2 names remained. Hale read them aloud once. Then he folded the paper and slipped it into his coat. "He's not running from us," Hale said to the men around him. "He's walking toward an ending he decided on a long time ago." Tracks led south. Toward Dead Man's Pass, a stretch of land with no towns, no witnesses, and nowhere left to disappear. For the first time since the killings began, the law wasn't guessing anymore. They were following truth. And Caleb Mercer knew it. He felt it in the silence behind him, in the way the land seemed to hold its breath. The reckoning was no longer behind him or ahead of him. It was riding right beside him now. Dead Man's Pass earned its name long before Caleb Mercer ever rode into it. The land narrowed there. Stone walls rising on both sides like the ribs of something long dead. Wind screamed through the canyon day and night, erasing tracks as quickly as they were made. If a man wanted to vanish, this was where he tried. Caleb rode slowly. He could push the horse harder, force distance. Disappear south into territory where law wore different faces. But he didn't. The list was nearly finished, and running now would turn the ending into something accidental. He hated accidents. Behind him, Marshal Hale and 6 deputies followed at a measured pace. No shouting. No reckless charge. Hale understood the man he was hunting well enough now to know that pressure mattered more than speed. "Spread out," Hale ordered quietly. "He knows this land. Don't give him a single direction to focus on." The first shot came just before dusk. One deputy fell, not dead, but screaming, his shoulders shattered by a rifle round fired from high ground. Caleb didn't press the advantage. He never did. The shot wasn't meant to kill. It was a warning. Hale felt a grim respect settle in his gut. Mercer could have turned the pass into a slaughterhouse. Instead, he was shaping the chase, forcing the law to slow down. To think. Night dropped fast. Campfires were forbidden. Lanterns stayed covered. Every shadow looked like a man holding a gun. Every sound felt deliberate. Sleep came in fragments, broken by imagined footsteps. At dawn, they found the second-to-last name crossed off the list. The body lay beneath a rock overhang, wrapped in a blanket as if for warmth. A former land assessor. His papers were stacked neatly beside him. The cross carved once more, steady, precise. Only one name remained. Caleb reached the highest point of the pass by midday. From there, he could see miles in every direction. Freedom lay to the south. Judgment rode in from the north. He dismounted and waited. When Hale crested the ridge, their eyes met across the dust and wind. No guns were raised. "You could have kept running," Hale said. Caleb nodded once. "I know." "You're done," Hale said. "There's nowhere left." Caleb looked past him, toward the land that had taken everything and given nothing back. "There hasn't been anywhere left for a long time." He reached slowly into his coat and withdrew the folded paper, the list, now complete. He held it out. Not like a surrender, but like a confession. Hale took it. The moment stretched, thin as wire. Then Caleb turned, placed his hands behind his back, and waited for the irons. The hunt was over. What remained was the reckoning the law could never truly understand, but would still have to answer for. They shackled Caleb Mercer without ceremony. No one cheered. No one spoke. Even the deputies moved carefully, as if loud voices might shatter something fragile in the air. The irons closed around Caleb's wrists with a dull, final sound. He didn't resist. He didn't bow his head either. Marshal Hale watched him closely as they started back through the pass. "You planned this," Hale said after a while. It wasn't a question. Caleb nodded. "I planned the end. Not the road. You killed 7 men. I named them first," Caleb replied calmly. "The killing came later." Hale didn't answer. He had learned when silence was the sharper tool. The journey back took 3 days. In every town they passed, people came out to look. Some recognized him. Others only saw the chains and decided that was enough. Faces held fear, hatred, curiosity, and, in a few cases, something closer to shame. In San Isidro, the jail filled before sunset. Inside a narrow cell, Caleb finally slept deeply for the first time in months. No dreams. No lists. No maps. Just darkness. The interrogation began the next morning. Hale laid the evidence out piece by piece, the documents, the personal belongings, the witnesses, the list. Caleb corrected him once, quietly, on the spelling of a name. "You don't deny it?" Hale asked. "No, do you regret it?" Caleb considered the question longer than expected. "I regret that it took me this long to understand what I was doing back then." The trial was moved to Stonewall, under armed guard. Too many people in San Isidro wanted their own version of justice. The courtroom was packed, landowners in clean coats, widows in black. Men who suddenly remembered where they had been when papers were signed and families disappeared. Caleb listened as each killing was described. He didn't interrupt. When asked to speak, he stood slowly and faced the room. "I didn't kill innocent men," he said. "I killed men who hid behind ink and law. If that makes me a monster, then I accept the name." The judge did not look at him when the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. The sentence followed without delay. Death by hanging. As the gavel fell, Caleb closed his eyes, not in fear, but in relief. The road had ended exactly where he knew it would. Outside, the town exhaled. Inside, Marshal Hale remained seated long after everyone else had risen, staring at the empty space where the accused had stood. Justice, he knew, was never as clean as the law pretended. And this case would haunt him long after the rope did its work. The gallows were raised at the edge of Stonewall, where the ground was hard and the wind carried sound for miles. They chose the morning, clean, bright, and unforgiving. A crowd gathered anyway. Some came for closure. Others for spectacle. A few stood apart, hats low, eyes fixed on the horizon as if they might see the past riding back in. Caleb Mercer walked with steady steps. The noose rested heavy in the marshal's hands. Thomas Hale met Caleb's eyes one last time. There was no hatred there. Only a question that would never be answered. "Any final words?" the judge asked. Caleb looked out over the crowd. He did not search for faces. He spoke to the land. "I followed orders once," he said evenly. "I thought that was enough to make it right. It wasn't. This is. No apology. No plea." The hood went over his head. The rope tightened. The trap fell. The sound was brief. The silence afterward was not. When it was over, the crowd dispersed quickly, as if ashamed of having witnessed something too honest. By noon, the gallows stood empty again, creaking softly in the wind. Marshal Hale stayed until the body was taken down. In the weeks that followed, documents resurfaced. Claims were challenged. Land was returned where it could be. Names once erased found their way back into records. It was not justice, only repair, but it was more than the frontier usually offered. San Isidro reopened its doors. The piano in the last chance played loud again. Children ran between houses at dusk. Life resumed its stubborn march forward. Yet some things did not fade. Men paused before signing papers. Sheriffs read deeds twice. And when strangers rode in at dawn, towns remembered the season when the law learned how sharp a quiet man could be. As for Thomas Hale, he took one last look at the map before folding it away. The path that had once pointed to blood now ended in an empty space. The West would always make monsters. But sometimes, it made mirrors first. And those were harder to face.